I would like to speak briefly, not so much about Bhagavan's images specifically as to what it was like to work with him while he created his images. I was profoundly blessed to spend the last 10 years serving Bhagavan while he was creating his image art. And he was always reminding me that the service to him was more about relationship than about a function. And always reminding me that the relationship was far senior to providing the function. There was one time when Bhagavan was photographing here on Naitumba, just down the beach, actually, and he was at the time doing very complex multiple exposure work. And he had to combine many layers in the camera and remember visually every one of the layers as he was working in order to conceive of the final composition. And so when he was working, it was extremely concentrated and intense process. And as he was doing the photography, he would often pass the camera back and forth between myself and him. And at one point, I was holding the camera in my lap, and I reached down and I accidentally hit the shutter and took a picture. And it wasn't funny at the time, obviously. I was the only one that knew what had happened. And in all honesty, my first thought was how to get out of there. But I quickly realized that I was going to have to tell him right then, because I couldn't have him continue to work on that particular exposure. And so I had to go over to Bhagavan and tell him what had happened. And he wasn't pleased, obviously, but he just continued to work in the moment. And then later that day, which I knew ahead of time, I was going to have to present all of the images from that day to Beloved and a group of devotees on a very large screen. And so later that night, I was presenting these images one by one, and as we were getting further and further in the role, I was getting more and more uptight. And finally we come to this image, and sure enough, in the middle of one of his beautiful compositions is a picture of my lap, basically. And I think that Bhagavan knew I had already had a complete nervous breakdown at that point. Because instead of being really intense with me, he was actually incredibly sweet, which broke my heart even more, I think. But he joked around with me that the image I took actually fit quite well with the rest of the composition. And I thought for sure the image would go in the trash, but he actually used that image to compose several other images and kept them in the suite, which is very sweet. There was another time when Bhagavan was working in his digital studio, Picture Perfect, just a few days before his Divine Mahasamadhi. And there's a wall in Picture Perfect that separates the main room and his chair from the area where the technical services happen. And my service was to sit right on the edge of that wall and to communicate between Bhagavan and the rest of the art team. And so at that particular point, Bhagavan wasn't able to work, and he was criticizing us for stopping him from working. And we were all on the other side of the wall trying to figure out what was going on. And then he was criticizing us for hiding out behind the wall and protecting ourselves from him and not being vulnerable, basically. And so I was asked to step out and speak directly to Bhagavan. And so I stepped into the main room, and somehow, just in the instant of stepping out from behind that wall, my disposition completely changed. And whereas before I was feeling pretty uptight and afraid and contracted, the instant I stepped out from that wall and I saw Bhagavan sitting in his chair, I was completely filled with love and devotion for him. And I sat down in front of his chair and raised my hands, and he started speaking with me. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, and I realized that the content wasn't the point, but that if I would stay directly in relationship with him, he would give the time that the rest of the team needed to straighten things out. And it was quite a long time. It must have been 15 or 20 minutes that I was sitting there speaking with him and just keeping my attention with him in every moment and my love. And eventually our team was able to straighten out the problem and allow him to resume working in silence as he typically did. But it was a very stark lesson at the time, and remains so, of how the relationship with him is really the core of everything. And that relationship with Bhagavan is something that's available to everyone. And what's so unique about his image art is that, completely apart from people's ideas about spiritual practice, about what it means to have a guru, and apart from all the cultural differences and differences of language all over the world, people can see his images and connect with him. As Ruchira Dhammanadikanta was saying, his images are his form. They are his murti, a representation of him. And in a moment where someone is standing in front of his images and really participating and vulnerable to what that represents, they are directly in relationship with him, with his divine spiritual presence. And that's something that will continue forever. I also wanted to just briefly thank the entire art team. It's a large group of people, and not everyone was able to speak here tonight. And there's also been a very large number of people over the past 10 years that have served Bhagavan's image art. And I want to thank everyone for their service, but even more importantly, on all of our behalf, to communicate our love and devotion. And profound gratitude. I love you, Master.